Hey, kia ora guys. This is Chris Clancy, all the way from New Zealand. I am going to be covering how to analyze primary sources today on Fiveable. This is a great resource for you, not just for AP Euro. This will be great for if you're going to take WAP or APUSH. And in general, this is going to be good for when you are in social studies classes in university, because you will be required to analyze a lot of primary and secondary sources in social studies classes. So let's jump right on in and we will go along. I hope everyone is enjoying their weekend. And here we go. So again, we're going to be analyzing primary sources. These strategies, they will work with secondary sources as well, but I wanted to focus on primary sources because that is what mostly we see. And it's a really good way to help you when a secondary source references that primary source. So make sure you follow Think Fiveable on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube. We tweet out all of our live casts, all of our reviews that we do. We highlight the streamers here that are with Fiveable on Instagram. So make sure you follow us. That way you can stay up to date with what we're doing. And you get reminders of these live streams so that you don't miss any of the reviews. This week, we've got a lot going on this week into next week. Tomorrow, Friday for you, it is going to be Saturday for me, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have Women of the Renaissance and the Reformation. One of the things that is really important for your AP Euro class is making sure that you understand how women were affected by these time periods. So it's a really good way to go over change and continuity over time. And then 9 o'clock, directly after that, we have Sherry Lang going over the scientific revolution at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So both of those are tomorrow. If you hear cat crying, I apologize. My cat wants to talk to you. He might join us on screen, so we'll see. On Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we've got Sherry Lang again going over exploration. Not very commonly talked about, at least in my classroom, simply because it's something that is covered so much in other classes. It's really good foundation for you to understand some of the motivations of the later European timeframe in the 16 and 1700s. And then on Sunday, we've got Liam Macklin, who's going to be going over Baroque art. Very good stream to be joining in on. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Baroque art does show up on the MP exam, and it does help you understand the effects of the Reformation on society as a whole. So those are going to be this weekend, and then next Friday, your Friday, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be going over constitutionalism versus absolutism. This will just be an overview as a whole. This is not going to be individual nations. So we have individual streams that are going to be about France and Russia, as well as England's constitutional development. So look out for those reminders. But next Friday, just the idea of what is constitutionalism and what is the idea of absolutism. So make sure that you join us for those. In this stream, what we're going to be looking at is first, we're going to be looking at why is analysis key to these classes. It's something that I know a lot of teachers talk about. I know it's what I talk about a lot, analysis, analysis, analysis. But sometimes we kind of forget that we need to explain why you need to analyze things. And so we're going to go over that. And then I'm going to go over some sorts of ways to analyze documents. We've got AP parts. I'll give you an example of AP parts. Got SOAPSTONE. I'll give you an example of SOAPSTONE. And then we've got HIPPO, and give you an example of HIPPO. We'll also go over maps and charts at the end. So why do we need to analyze? So if you look at this picture right here on the right, you've got Encyclopédie, Dictionnaire, Raison. So for those of you that don't speak French, that is the Encyclopedia and Dictionary of Reason, of Sciences and Arts. It's from a French Enlightenment thinker, Diderot. If you don't speak French, how are you going to understand what to use this for? Okay, and that's why we analyze. You need to be able to know what a document is saying. Okay, it creates that deeper understanding of topics covered in class. Enlightenment is a big topic because it affects a lot of things. And so this is an example of an Enlightenment primary source that you might have to analyze. Now, it won't be given to you only in French. You'll be given a translation. But even then, you have to understand what the translation is saying. And so if you don't know how to analyze it, how do you know what the translation is saying? It also is a really good way for you to have information to draw on when writing your LEQ, SAQ, or DBQ. All the time hear about my kids would say, but I don't know what to write. What do I put down? What do I write? And I tell them, well, use the documents we've covered in class. Use the documents you have in your textbook. Because your textbook has documents in it that you can practice analyzing to help you for when you do the AP exam in May. It also is going to strengthen those synthesis skills for when you are analyzing multiple documents. While this is not a formal skill anymore on the AP exam, it's a skill that you need for college. It's a skill that you're going to use in university when you are in English class or social studies classes, as well as in your science classes. You've got to be able to take information from two different sources and put them together to explain something new. And by analyzing documents in practice, this is something that you can take with you, not just for the AP exam, but to university. Also, it's going to make connections for you personally to the content. Okay, learning about all these old dead people and never making a connection to it means that you're really not going to remember it or understand why you're learning it. But if you can analyze where these people are coming from through their writings, through their paintings, through their speeches, you can better understand why they did what they did. And you can make those connections to current events. We can make connections all the way from 1517 with Martin Luther to the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Okay, it's very possible to do that, but we have to understand why those are connected, and we do that through our analysis of primary documents up until the current day to understand that there's this ripple effect of events and that everything is connected. And so mostly this is going to make you a better historian. All right, the goal of the AP exam is to show, can you write and think like a historian? If you can write and think like a historian, you are going to be doing very well on the AP exam. So with that, let's jump right in. AP parts. Some of you may have heard of AP parts. Some of you may not have heard of AP parts. It's not something I really use in my classroom. I've shown it to my kids, but it is a really good way for written sources, in my opinion, for you to analyze documents. So it stands for author, all right? And when you were looking at it, you want to ask yourself, who created the source? What do you know about the author? So if it's like a famous person, such as Napoleon Bonaparte, what do you know about him that's going to affect how he writes or affect why he writes what he writes? Next is place and time. To me, this is the most important thing with the history source. You've got to know place and time, okay? Because that gives you so much information about what is going on in a document or in the question that's being asked of you. Okay, if the document is about a witch trial in the 1600s, you should know that that's bringing up things from the Reformation and education and the place of women after we have this upheaval in European society. But you don't know that if you don't know place and time. Okay, so for me, this is probably the most important part of any kind of analysis, is knowing that place and time, and that helps everything else fall in place. So from there, we go to prior knowledge. What do you already know? This is the one thing I always tell my kids, that when you read the source of a document, that should automatically give you some information of what the document's going to be about. All right, so if we go back to our witch trial document, again, that should bring up the Reformation. It should bring up the ideas of education, women and society and the family, things like that. Those are what we call that activation synthesis in psychology, where your memory starts activating different parts that you really should be bringing up when you're analyzing a document, because it makes it easier for you. So then we have the audience, and that's who's going to be reading this source or listening to the speech, all right? Who is it for? Are you writing this for yourself, so it's a journal, or are you writing this for posterity. And so you're writing like an account of an event, maybe an account of a battle that happened. And then reliability is a big key issue here, because if it's a primary source, meaning it's from the time, but that person might not have been there, is it reliable? Are they reporting on what they were told so that we have the information later on? Are they giving us a slanted view of what happened? Okay, we know that if we are reading a Catholic source about Martin Luther, it's going to be very, very biased. And we're going to talk about bias in a little bit, because that is a very dirty word in history. Next, we have reason, which is why was the source produced? Nobody produces things just because when we are talking about documents with this time frame. It's too expensive. There's always a reason. Are they doing it again for posterity, so it's preserved? Were they doing it so that they could convince somebody? What's behind the production of the source? Okay, in art is the same thing here, because art does count as a source. All right, the production of art shows wealth and power and prestige. So why would they produce one type of art and not another? Those are the types of questions you're looking at for the reason. And then you have your last two parts. You have T, the main idea, which is what is the source trying to convey? This kind of goes along with reason and audience. Basically, this is your summary. The main idea is the summary of the source. And then you have the significance, which is the so what, as I like to call it. Okay. These documents, when they're given to you on an exam, they're not just pulled out of thin air. They're meant to get you to think in a certain way. So what are they getting you to think about? What are they trying to convince you of? Okay, the source is important, but why is it important? Okay, if it's going to be a painting, especially something that's art, why is that painting more important than another? What are you getting out of it? So here is an example of AP parts. Okay, using some excerpts from the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648. Automatically, you should be thinking of what is the Treaty of Westphalia about, like the time frame. The year should give you a hint as well. This is before you even see the text. This is the first thing I tell my students, regardless of whether it's for homework or a quiz or a test, look at the source first. The source gives you so much information, okay? And then we have our text. So we've got two articles here. Article 28 and article, I want to say 64. Don't quote me on that because my Roman numerals are not the best. All right. I'm not going to read these to you, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to break these down and show how you can use AP parts to answer or analyze this kind of document. Okay. So you start with our A, which is what again? Who can tell me what the A is in our audience? All right, very good. So A is where you start, and A stands for the author. Now, in your source, it normally will tell you the author, right? Whether it's one person, two people, or something. In this case, it doesn't. But that still doesn't mean we don't know who would have written this source, okay? When we say dignitaries, we mean diplomats, the representatives of these nations that were involved in the 30 Years' War. So you've got representatives from Sweden, the Holy Roman Empire, France, Spain, the Papal Nuncio, which you may or may not have heard of before. I know a lot of students have an issue when they see the word papal. They always go, who does that refer to? This is the representative of the Pope. Okay, so it's from Rome. You've got representatives from the Venetian Republic, the Dutch Republic, and the Swiss Confederacy. Okay, so again, author, not always going to be given to you like it isn't here, but you should still have some idea of who it is depending upon what the source is. So for a treaty, typically treaties are almost always going to be written by dignitaries. They're always going to represent the nations that are involved, that were either part of the war or a part of the peace process. Okay. So next we have P for place and time. This one's pretty easy. It's given to you right in the name, Westphalia. Now, Westphalia, if you haven't gotten this far yet, it's in the Holy Roman Empire. all right? And it's taking place in 1648. This is where that previous knowledge comes in. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire is made up of lots of different German principalities. There's over 300 of them. They elect a Holy Roman Emperor. They are divided at this time frame between the Lutherans in the north and Catholics in the south. They're fighting for control over what would become modern-day Germany. 1648, this is a turning point in European history, right? This is a time frame where we're saying, okay, we're done killing you because you're Protestant. We're done killing you because you're Catholic. We are not going to do that anymore. Right? So very important time frame in European history. And then we look at the next P, which is prior knowledge. This is where it really helps you understand what happened to start the 30 Years' War and how is that shaping this treaty that ends the 30 Years' War. So the Protestant Reformation, so knowing people like Martin Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, and Knox, knowing how it's different in the German Reformation versus the French Reformation versus the English Reformation, the French Wars of Religion and the War of Three Henries. All of these are prior knowledge that can help you understand why what's put in here is put in here. And so next we have our audience. This is one of those hard ones because time frame is going to be really important here. All right. So in 1648, the average European can't read. Right. Education is starting to pick up, but it's still very much a wealthy dominated area. It's still a very male dominated area. So for written things like this at this time frame, we tend to see them being written for the wealthy and for men. In this case, this is a treaty that's written to the royal houses of Europe, the leaders, the kings and the queens of the different nations of Europe, basically outlining this is how we're going to deal with each other throughout the rest of time. Okay. Now, little did they know when they wrote it, it's not going to work, but they at least try, right? So then we have our reason. Why are they doing this? Well, the 30 Years' War was a very bloody and brutal war. Over 8 million people died, probably one of the most expensive and deadly conflicts in European history prior to the 1900s. That kind of destruction needs a written peace that can end this war. Okay, they're not just doing this because they're writing a treaty. This is a big idea. It also is enshrining the idea of freedom of religion, but there's a lot of limitations placed upon that. Okay. T is going to be the main idea. So the main idea here is where you actually need to read the source that's been given to you. And so what I've done is I've summarized these first, this paragraph here, the Article 28 and Article, I think it's 64. Again, don't quote me on my Roman numerals. I don't remember them. All right. Article 28, it's basically saying, okay, the war is over, and we are going to honor what was then called the Confession of Augsburg. You might have learned it as the Peace of Augsburg in your class, which is, again, only here for Lutherans. It is not for all Protestants. Okay, notice who's not involved in these negotiations. England. Dignitaries do not include England. So English Protestants don't count if they move to the continent. Jews definitely don't count, neither do Muslims. This is only for Lutherans and Catholics. And it's going to reestablish the idea that if you live in a principality where your prince is Lutheran, you're Lutheran. If you live in a principality where your prince is Catholic, you're Catholic. All right, you might have learned that in your class in the Latin, quis regio, eius religio, he who rules, his religion. It was the founding basis of that Peace of Augsburg, or what they're calling the Confession of Augsburg. So that's what the first paragraph or the first article is talking about. Okay. The second article here, Article 64, that's where it's specifying, again, only here within the Holy Roman Empire. And again, only within those principalities of Lutheranism and Catholicism, not any of the others. But what it is also saying is that you have a freedom to practice your religion without being persecuted. And so, again, we say it's freedom of religion, but it's got limitations, right? Because you have to be Catholic or you have to be Lutheran. But it's a start, Okay, and I think that's where the S comes into significance, because it does two things. One, it uses diplomacy rather than war to solve an issue. All right, the 30 Years' War showed they were not going to solve this Protestant Catholic split with war. It's not working. Too many people have too many feelings, and emotions make people heightened in their hatred of things. So rather than use war, they're going to use diplomacy to solve international matters. And so we see the development of what would become ambassadors. So countries would send an ambassador to other nations, and they would be like, okay, we have this problem. How can we solve this diplomatically rather than going to war with each other? The second thing is it begins that pavement for the way of having Jews have freedom of religion and other Protestant sects. Okay, Calvinism was not considered part of this. Eventually it is, right? You have the Anabaptists who were not part of this. Eventually they are. So it starts somewhere. It has to give us this basis to go, and that's what it shows us. Okay. So with that, I want to come to the questions that I've asked here on the side. Okay. And I'll start with this first one. What is the hardest part of analyzing documents for you? We've got one answer here from Dakota, trying to get the main point from the document when trying to add it into a DBQ. I can say that to me, that's not the hardest point. The hardest part tends to be point of view. But what I notice with my own students when they are doing the main idea, the language tends to be an issue because you're reading documents that are written not the way that we speak, okay? Contrary to popular belief, if it is from 1560s, 1550s till today, that's all considered modern English, okay? Shakespeare, the founder of modern English, right? No, we don't say these and thous anymore, but it is supposed to be understandable by us. And so what I always tell my kids is when they get a document that has got that flowery language, right? Try to take out the descriptors and leave just the basic subject and verb, right? And then you should be able to understand it a little bit better. Okay, so if you look at the second part right here, and to prevent any of the future differences arising in the political state, all and every one of the electors, princes, and states, we don't need to know that. Okay, you just need to know to prevent future problems, it's established to confirm liberties. Right? I cut out all of these words that are just flowery language. They're just there to expand upon, make it sound better than what it really is. Another thing that I tell my students when it comes to analyzing these documents that are written in an older style is to try to remember that when they were writing for a very select few. And they're writing for people who you have to show some kind of deference. So think of them as if they're writing to like your grandmother or your grandfather, somebody who's much older, much wiser than you. And you wouldn't talk to them the way you would talk to your friends. Because a lot of times what I've seen with my students is that when they're trying to analyze these documents, they're trying to figure it out the way that they would talk to their friends. And that's where the problem tends to come in, is rather than thinking of it as where you're friends, think of it as you're talking to somebody who's much older and wiser than you. How would you explain this topic to them? And that tends to help them a lot. So let us move on to our next example here. SOAPSTONE. This is a very particular analysis because this helps you with point of view. To me, this is the hardest part for students, is point of view. Okay, because they tend to always just go, it's from the point of view of a guy. It's from the point of view of a general. It's from the point of view of a biased person. None of those tell us point of view. Okay, all of those sentences tell us that you know two things. You know how to read, and you know that there's bias, but it doesn't tell us anything else. Okay, so for SOAPSTONE, the way that it breaks down, your S is for speaker or the source, so very similar to your author. And again, you've got these questions you're looking at. Who is the source? Where do they come from? If you've got a guy who is in England from Italy and he's writing about the English Reformation, that makes a difference on how he's viewing the English Reformation versus Thomas Cramer, who is from England, right? So your status as a person, rich or poor, or secular, religious, male or female, all those things have an effect on how you look at an issue and how you write about it. O can be either occasion or origin. It just depends on what the document is saying. When we say the word occasion, what we're referring to is we are referring to meaning what is the event that happened, okay, what's going on at that time. Origin is referring to where is it from. And then the big thing here, I can never stress enough, is why. Always look at why a document was created. Okay, if you can get to the why, it's going to help you so much. Same thing, it's going to be audience. Who is this written for? What did they want them to get out of this? Okay, that's a very big thing about what did the author want the audience to get out of the document. P is for purpose. Why did said person, writer, say the document? Meaning, what did they do this for? Again, you don't write a document in this time frame. You don't produce a painting in this time frame without reason. It's too expensive. All right, it costs too much money. So you're producing this for a reason, for posterity, or to change minds, or to teach something. S is the subject, similar to the O, the occasion. For me, though, what I say the difference is if the document, like the Treaty of Westphalia one we had, that's 1648, that's the occasion. The subject is the 30 Years' War. So it's kind of like you start with the small and you grow into the bigger. So you've got this, very detailed picture. Now we need to look at the wider lens, the bigger picture of what's going on as a whole, rather than what's just in that one document, okay? And then your last is your tone, and this relates to the language used by the author. Flowery language, things that we oftentimes think of as just filler. If you talk to, English teachers when they read kids' papers and the kid repeats themselves, right? It's flowery, it's repetitive. It has reasons, okay? When this time frame, people usually did it for, conveying an idea. It might take their idea like Machiavelli's idea, right? He was very brutal, very ruthless. He tried to wrap it up in this, like, let me help you become the best Medici that you can be. But if you look at the tone of his book, it's pretty ruthless, okay? And so the language kind of tells you what they're trying to convey. The language tells you whether they're happy or they're sad, whether they're writing from a place of authority or whether they're using conjecture, okay? So let's look at an example of how to use soapstone. So here we've got a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. This should be good not just for Euro. You would see this in WAP as well as APUSH, because this is a very big thing in all three classes due to the exploration topic. Again, we're looking at this just at the source here. What's the time frames? 1542. Now, this is where it's really important for you to remember that history does not run from A to B, B to C, C to D. It runs A and then B's at the same time, C's at the same time, D's at the same time. X can be going at the same time as A. It's all clumped together, all right? So 1542 is exploration, but it's also the Renaissance. It's also the Reformation. It's also the starts of the scientific revolution. You've got all of these really big topics going on at once, okay? And that can guide how you analyze the text, right? So here's the text. This one, it's not too long, so I'll read it very quickly for you. Now the ultimate end and scope that incited the Spaniards to endeavor the extirpation and desolation of this people was gold only. Finally, in one word, their ambition and avarice, whom they so despicably contemned that they treated them not as beasts, which I cordially wish they would, but as the most abject dung and filth of the earth. And this also is really truly that the Spaniards never received any injury from the Indians, but that they rather reverenced them as persons descended from heaven, until that they were compelled to take up arms, provoked thereunto by repeated injuries, violent torments, and unjust butcheries. Very strong language. Okay, this is really good to use soapstone for, because you're going to get a really good view of the point of view that Bartolome had during this time frame. Okay, so we will start at the beginning. S, the writer, the author, or as we call it, the The speaker is Bartolome de las Casas. Now, who was he? He was a Dominican friar, meaning he was a Catholic man. He was very religious. He was part of an order of monks. He went to the New World to save souls, and he became an early advocate for the humane treatment of Native Americans. And this was not seen at that time by the Spaniards. The Native Americans typically were seen as being either devils or less than human, less than animals. They were not treated very well at all. All right, so for him, this was a very big thing. The occasion, I don't think would fit here. This would be more about origin. And so de las Casas was originally from Spain, but when he's writing this, he's in the New World. Okay, this is a firsthand account of what he has seen the conquistadores treat the Native Americans like. Okay, and so that's a very big thing to give you an idea of why he's writing this as well. Okay, because if you were there witnessing this and you believed that people should be treated humanely, you're going to want everybody to know how they're being treated and why they're being treated the way they're treated. Because otherwise, why are people going to listen to you? All right. The audience. For this case, I would say that you have a dual audience here. Right? Even though the average Spaniard might not be able to read, this is still being written for the average Spaniard, the everyday Spaniard who is going to decide to make that trek across the Atlantic to the New World. De las Casas is going to want to convince them, hey, don't come here as a destroyer. Treat these people humanely. They are humans. They are the children of God. They are, just like us. They need guidance like a child does. He's also writing this directly to the king and the queen at the time. Right? It's King Philip would be the king at the time. Because he wants to make sure that the king and the queen know how the conquistadores are acting in their name. Right? Because everything that they did was always done in the name of the monarch. So if you're the monarch and you have your conquistadores going out to the New World and they're killing and maiming and raping, is that how you want to be viewed? Because that's your legacy that's going to happen. The purpose to me is quite clear here. He is trying to prevent further exploitation and maltreatment of the natives. And this is where we are going to get into that tone at the very end and how you can tell. And then S, the subject, the wider subject, is going to not just be the treatment of Native Americans, it's going to be the reasons why conquistadores from Spain went to the New World. It's going to be exploration as a whole. This also is technically part of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, because one of the things that they did is they went out to the New World and got millions of new converts to Catholicism. Right? Remember, Catholicism is the largest branch of Christianity today with over 1 billion followers. Okay, so the Catholic Counter-Reformation, very, very popular and very, very successful. And then the last is the tone. Okay, words in here that show you what the tone is. Okay, where he's talking about them being treated like beasts, where they're being treated like dung and filth of the earth. Those are very strong words, even by today's standards. Right, and those are very easy words to understand. Okay, other words that might not necessarily be that easy are avarice. Avarice is referring to greed. Right, we know that the Spaniards wanted gold, and they found billions of dollars of gold there. So greed is there. But down here at the end, where it's talking about how the Indians are compelled to take up arms, provoked thereunto by repeated injuries, violent torment, and unjust butcheries. That's very, very vivid language. It brings to mind a very clear picture of how the natives were treated by the conquistadores. Okay, they were attacked. They were sometimes raped. They were sometimes torn apart. They were treated as slaves. They were treated horribly, not like humans. Okay, so to the tone here is very easy for me to see. It's scathing, right? It's very reproaching. He's saying, "Shame on you." All right, he's telling the conquistadores, "You need to stop. This isn't Christian. This isn't human. This is not how we treat everyone else." All right. So point of view here, then. you could say that de las Casas' point of view is that the actions taken by the conquistadores were negative and did not help the Native Americans, nor did they help the Spanish in the eyes of the rest of the world as being seen as the leaders of the world at the time, right? Because at this time, they were. Spain was the richest country in the world. And so if they're the leaders, they're being held to a certain degree that the rest are not, right? So let's look at our next question that I posed here. And it kind of goes along with what we talked about a little earlier, which is how do you handle documents that might not be written in modern English? And so one of the things that I say about documents that are written in modern English, like we would say, is find the words that you can understand, okay? Because if you look at De las Casas, his document's not in modern English. We don't write like this anymore. But it's still understandable when we use the terms that we understand. We know that dung is referring to excrement, poop, right? We know that filth refers to trash, okay? We know that when he talks about persons descended from heaven, he's referring to children of God, right? Because that's the belief of major religions, that we are all the children of the creator, of God, okay? We don't have to understand all parts of the document, right? Especially during a DBQ on the AP exam, you don't have time to do that. But you can pick out the parts that you know and piece it together to understand. Or if he's talking about, natives being referred to as dung and filth, the natives are not being treated well. He's talking about the natives not being treated as persons descended from heaven. The conquistadores are not acting in a Christian-like manner, okay? So for me, that's what I would tell my students, is to pick out the words that they know, pick out the phrases that they know, put it together, and work from there. If they still don't understand, everything that's being said, that's when they need to go line by line, reading the document to understand the document. But that's a choice that you need to make. One of the things I will say that leads us into our next question: how can you use AP parts and SOAPSTONE to help you in your class? You need to practice this. Okay, this isn't something you can just pick up overnight. Practicing document analysis is key to success in all three of the histories classes, whether it's APUSH, AP Euro, or WAP. Your textbook has a great wealth of primary source documents and secondary source documents. We use the Spielvogel Western Civilization in the school that I was teaching at in the States. I can think from memory, there was usually at least 4 or 5 primary source, secondary source documents per chapter. And if you spent, 5-10 minutes a day analyzing 1 or 2 of those, using AP parts, using SOAPSTONE, and using HIPPO, which we're about to cover, that will help you, one, with speed, because I know that's a big issue with students with getting ready for the AP exam. They're always like, I never have enough time to analyze the documents. If you practice throughout the year, you get better at it, you get faster at it, okay? They say you have 15 minutes to analyze those 7 documents. Really, that should be enough. If you've practiced enough, you should be able to start knowing what you're looking for to pick out those parts. Other things is when your teacher gives you, homework that has pictures or documents, or, it's got charts and maps. Use the AP parts in the SOAPSTONE, even if it's not required for the homework. The practice helps you get better, right? I know I've said this over and over again. I'm going to repeat it again. The practice helps you get better, okay? Practice, practice, practice. All right, so with that, let us move on to our HIPPO. Now, most of you, if not all of you, should be familiar with HIPPO, at least at some point. HIPPO is what a lot of us learn and teach to do a DBQ in class, because you are required to show one of these in order to get one of the points on the DBQ rubric, okay? So HIPPO stands for historical context or the historical situation. Teachers use both, okay? Basically, if the document gives you a time frame, like the De las Casas document, it gave us the year of 1542, what's going on around that time period. I generally tell my students, for European history, we're looking at 50 years before, 50 years after. For world history prior to this year, You could expand that to longer. With this year's changes into world history starting at 1200, I would say you should probably limit yourself to no more than 100 years before and after. It depends on what the DBQ topic is about, whether you can go further than that. For APUSH, you can actually shrink it down sometimes to 10 years or 20 years most before and after, depending upon what the topic is and where you guys are in your APUSH class on what your DBQs are going to write about. That's going to be very dependent upon the topic that you get as the DBQ. So for Euro, general rule of thumb, 50 years before and after. For your world history, I would say 100 years before and after. Don't quote me on that. I don't teach world history any longer. And so because of the changes, I'm kind of basing it off of how we go with Euro. You guys start a little bit before we do, 250 years before we do. But I would talk to your teacher about that. Find out what they say. My guess here is going to be probably around 100 years before and after. APUSH, I would say probably what we would consider 2 generations. Right? Generations is roughly 12, 15 years. So maybe no more than 30 years before and after a topic. Unless it's a really big topic like slavery, you can go really far back and up until the end of Reconstruction. It just depends on where they put you in history on how far back and how far forward you should go. With that, we have the intended audience. Who was the document produced for? Why was it produced for? One of the biggest things that students have a hard time for with this when it's a female author is females, at the time frame, women generally, if it's prior to mid or early 1800s, weren't being taught to read and write unless they were wealthy. And even then, they weren't being taught to read and write in a lot of like the academic sense. Okay? They were taught flowery poems and how to write songs and how to write love letters. They weren't taught how to balance, a balance sheet for, I just lost the word, auditing and for accounting. That's what I was looking for. So someone like Simone de Beauvoir or someone, Olympe de Gouges, they're writing, yes, they're writing for women. They want women to have their rights, but they're more importantly writing to the men, telling the men, hey, we're here, we want our rights, we're demanding our rights. You need to get on board with this, and here's why. Okay, so trying to convince the men to, believe in what they're writing about. So just keep that in the back of your mind, especially when you're looking at a female writer from a certain time period. Who are they really going to be writing to? Is it going to be other women, or is it going to be the men who could read? P stands for point of view, and this is where we're going to talk about bias. Guys, bias is a dirty word in history. It is the word that me, as an AP reader, when I read an essay, that's LEQ or DBQ, and I see a kid wrote, the author has bias, my response is, duh, okay? Every single thing produced has bias. It is impossible not to. Even paintings, okay? You can see behind me, I've got artwork, right? I've got pictures. That all shows bias. It shows my bias and what I believe in. It shows the bias of the producer, okay? It shows what their beliefs are. There's no way to get around bias. And so when you write bias on an essay, whether it's an LEQ or DBQ, you're not telling us anything. You are not telling us the point of view of the author. Showing us the point of view of the author is showing us why they have that bias. So Olympe de Gouges, she obviously is biased towards women's rights, but why? So you could say that Olympe de Gouges is influenced by the fact that the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen excluded women. You just told me she has bias without using that word. So please, as a Napier reader, I am begging you, stop writing that the author has bias. Stop writing that the painter has bias. Just don't use that word, okay? Phrase it and tell us why they did what they did, and then you're telling us this is their point of view and the bias that they have. All right? Cannot stress that enough. Right? Just don't write it. Don't use it. The last P is for purpose, meaning why did the author produce the document? What did they intend with the document? What was the outcome? With this purpose, what I tend to see with the HIP part of HIPPO, you really tend to see them kind of go together, okay? Meaning that if you do one, it's kind of easy to do two and put them together. You don't have to do two. That's the thing. My students, when we start doing this, they want to do all parts of it, and they want to give me all parts of it in their DBQ. And I'm like, guys, you don't have to give me all parts. You only have to give me one. You need to give me the historical context, or the intended audience, or the point of view, or the purpose. Now you can give me more, and that happens, all right? For me, what I tend to see is that the point of view really kind of goes along with the intended audience. And the purpose kind of goes along with the historical context. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. You can do point of view and purpose together. You can do historical context and intended audience together. You can do all four of them on your DBQ. That's really up to you. Time is obviously going to be the factor here in what you decide to do, all right? The O, I didn't put it on here because we're going to do a stream later on specifically about how to use HIPPO only on DBQs and analyzing the rubric of the DBQ. The O stands for outside evidence or outside knowledge. It's one of the points that is on the DBQ rubric. And the O is contingent upon the time frame or the topic of the document that you're doing. And again, you don't need to do O for every single document. You just need one piece, all right? So here is an example of HIPPO. This is actually from a DBQ from previous years. It is the English Parliament acting on the instruction of King Henry VIII. They have passed what was called the Act of Supremacy from 1534. Now, with the MCQ sections of the exam, whether it's your class exams or your DBQ, but most especially for the MCQ, what I tell my students is they need to read the source first. They need to know where it's coming from, what it's about, right? Without even reading this passageway, I know we're talking about the English Reformation. I know King Henry wants to get a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. I know that he wants to have a male heir. I know that he wants to marry Anne Boleyn. All of these things I know without ever reading the source, okay? Then I'm going to read my question. What is my question asking me about? My question asks me why, I'm making this up right now, what was the purpose of the Act of Supremacy being passed in relation to King Henry's ability to have power over the Pope? It's a very badly worded question, but basically that question's asking me, why did they do this? Okay, I don't need to read this. I should know that based off the source being from King Henry VIII's Parliament and the time frame during the English Reformation, that he wants to have power over the church. He wants to be able to divorce his wife without the approval of the Pope, okay? And that gives me more time to answer questions on the MCQ than if I had read this and then started answering those questions. Because you are going to have questions where you should be able to, based off the question and the source, answer and move on. Remember, it's 55 questions, 55 minutes. Every single question refers to a stimulus. Some of those times you might need to spend it to read the stimulus to answer the question. But the more you can save up time for those harder questions, the better. But anyways, let's move on to actually how you would HIPPO this for a DBQ. So here, the H is where we're looking at the source and the source alone. I haven't even read the document, okay? So we know, again, it's passed during the English Reformation. It's in the midst of the wider Protestant Reformation. So the Lutheran Reformation, the Calvinists, the Anabaptists, the John Knox in Scotland, things like that. We know that Parliament is now taking power away from Pope Paul III by making Henry VIII the head of the Church of England. Okay, specifically the head of the Church of England. This is very important to understand. At this time frame, King Henry still believed himself to be a Catholic. All right, he still believed that the Pope had a place. He just didn't believe the Pope had a place over the Church of England. Okay. The intended audience here is going to be for the population of England and Wales. Even though they couldn't read, what would happen, you'd have a town crier. Here's the laws that were passed by the Parliament. Because now basically what King Henry is saying is, I'm in charge of your religious life. Before, it was the priest who was answered to the Pope, or the bishop answered to the Pope. Now it's me. Don't argue with me. The point of view is where I would say that this is the reason why it's happening. Again, he wants to be able to divorce or annul his marriages. Right? And if you remember, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. You can remember his wives and how it happened. The whole goal here is to produce that male heir. All right, so this is definitely from the point of view of a guy who wants to produce a male heir, and the only way he can do that is if he takes power away from the Catholic Church. And then the purpose is it's going to give King Henry that power over the church holdings. Remember, one of the things that he does is he seizes all the monasteries and the convents, takes church land, and sells it off. That makes him a very wealthy man. It also allows him to legally divorce his wife, and it ultimately changes the faith of the nation. Okay, so all of this, by the way, I did based off the source. I never read the document. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read the document. Okay, you need to read the documents to make sure that if you're going to use them in your essays, you know what you're using correctly. But it's about timing and practice. I've had a lot of practice with this, so I can do this lot. You're going to need to practice this where you read the documents and HIPPO them, and read the documents and HIPPO them over and over and over again until you get to the point where you know, okay, English Parliament, 1534, English Reformation. Here's what I know about it. Now let me go back and read it quickly to see, does this match up with what I wrote down or not, or do I add more to it? Okay. So that's how you HIPPO a document. We're going to do this a lot more in depth a little later on. So what's the last question that I have here is, do you need to do all parts of HIPPO during a DBQ on the AP exam? Guys, this is the key thing about this question that I asked here. It's the AP exam. Your teacher in your class is going to tell you to do different things. Some teachers will tell you do all parts. Some teachers will tell you don't do all parts. Me personally, as a reader, I say you need to do the parts that are going to help you with your argument. Okay. You remember, to get those extended points on the DBQ rubric, they all have to tie into your thesis, which is your whole argument of your essay. It doesn't tie into your thesis. You can get 1 point, but you can't get the other. And so if you want to go for that 7, by all means, do it. But make sure that what you're doing ties into the argument. If you're HIPPOing an entire document every single time, and you're writing it down, but you're not tying it into that thesis, we can't give you that 2nd point. Okay? So for me, that's what I would tell my students. Your teachers might tell you to do something different, and that's perfectly fine. There is no right or wrong way, technically, to do this. Okay, this is all just about helping you understand it in different ways and giving you practice. So again, I can't stress enough, your textbook got a lot of primary source and secondary source documents. AP parts them, SOAPSTONEs them, HIPPO them. Practice it as you are doing your readings for class, because if your teacher's like me, you've got reading almost every single night. It might not be a lot of reading, but it's still something that you could practice. It will also help you with understanding the content as your teacher delivers a lecture or you do an activity in class. The last thing to cover is what, to me, kind of seems like the easier of any kind of analysis, and that's maps and charts, okay? I've got 3 kinds of maps up here. I've got a political map here on the left, okay? This is a basic map that is in every textbook that you see around anywhere in the world. It shows you the names of a country and their capitals. It might show you major cities depending upon the country and how many major cities they have. Use the key that's provided to understand the map. Okay, a lot of times students don't read the title and they don't read the key. They just immediately start looking at it and going, oh, I see Germany. Okay, Germany's capital is Berlin. All right, this must be about World War II. Where does it say that on the map? Okay, you've got maps like the one here on the right. This is a religious map. So this is showing you 2 different things. It's showing you the location of religions. It's also kind of showing you religious population. If there were numbers on this map to show you the amount of people that believed in these faiths, then it would also show you true population. But with this, these types of maps are to show you divisions within a continent as a whole. Europe, obviously, is what I'm using, and how those divisions happened and where they spread and didn't spread. And so I really like to use these maps to kind of give students an understanding that we think of Europe as these individual countries, France and England and Germany and Spain, all vying for power and having nothing in common. But when we look at a map of religion, there's all of these commonalities that we see between multiple countries. And then a third map that we see here is a map of what you can look at as empire building, or in this case, I've got Napoleon's empire. It also shows you influence. Okay, the French Empire is only these dark purple places, but his influence goes beyond that. All right, because it goes into the light purple where he's got puppet people in place, and it goes into the pink where these people are too afraid to go against him because they don't have the power to go against him. So this type of map really shows you the spread of power. And it shows you how much influence can spread from one country outwards. And then the last thing is charts. Again, just like with maps, you have got to read the titles. If you don't read the titles, you don't know what the chart is showing you. Because without looking at the title of this chart on the left, all you see is manuscripts and printed books. Well, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean if you don't know what we're looking at? Why do I know that there's 10,000 or 11,000 manuscripts in the 6th century and over 1 billion printed books in the 18th century? Well, that's where we're looking at the output here. We're looking at how many are produced, okay? You've got here in the middle, the German Reichstag elections. So this is showing us the percentage of people that voted in major parties, which is really important for understanding how political parties work, how they get power. And then on the top right, World War II casualties, understanding the amount of people that are killed and the percentage of population it was at that time frame. So charts and maps tend to be a little bit easier to analyze simply because they give you all the information up front. You just actually have to make sure you use it. Read the keys, read the title, go through the whole chart and go through the whole map before you start using it. Because otherwise you can make a mistake and just start talking about printed books and how printed books, only started in the 18th century where they took off, when in reality we're looking at printed books from the 15th to the 18th century, and manuscripts are still around in the 15th century, okay? So that's my cast for today, guys. Do you have any questions? Anything I can answer before I sign off? All right, well, don't forget, we have those casts coming up tomorrow at 8 and 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us then, especially for the Women in Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution. And I will see you guys next week with my cast. So you guys have a great rest of your week and weekend, and I will see you all later. Kia kaha.